Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Our mission, well, it's pretty simple. We grab a stack of sources or sometimes, like today, just one really potent one, and we try to cut through all the noise.
Yeah, we want to find those, essential nuggets of knowledge, the insights that really help you get what's going on quickly.
Exactly. And today we are diving like headfirst into this fascinating article from Restore Nigerian News. The title alone, well, it grabs you.
It really does. We can remove Tinubu from power, Amaichi says, as leaders lament the weaponization of poverty.
Yeah, that title tells you a lot right off the bat, doesn't it?
It sure does. The article focuses on a really significant public event, a public lecture in Abuja, June 1st, 2025.
And this was actually part of the 60th birthday celebration for Rotimi Amechi, the former Rivers State governor.
Right. A birthday party, but also, well, a political forum, it seems.
Yeah. And the theme of the lecture wasn't exactly light and fluffy, was it?
Not at all. Weaponization of poverty as a means of underdevelopment, a case study of Nigeria.
Wow. Heavy stuff.
And the guest list for this thing, equally weighty. And, maybe surprisingly, quite diverse. The source mentions prominent figures from, different sectors, different political parties even.
Like who?
Well, former governors Rotimi Amaichi, obviously, and Nasir El-Rufai. Then you had former Vice President Atiku Abubakar from the main opposition PDP.
Okay.
Plus the Emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido II, Professor Wole Soyinka, Cardinal John Onaiyekan, a whole range of people.
Bringing that specific mix together, politicians from different camps like the ruling APC and the opposition PDP, plus religious leaders, traditional rulers, academics, to talk about poverty and underdevelopment, especially hosted by a political figure. It immediately signals this wasn't just, an academic chat.
Absolutely. There's a clear political undercurrent there. It's fascinating seeing people who might normally be, well, on opposite sides or in totally different spheres, coming together under this theme.
It suggests, at the very least, a shared concern, maybe, about the state of the country, leadership, this huge issue of poverty.
And doing it at a political event, framed by a politician's birthday, that's significant in itself.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack what the source tells us about the key viewpoints shared there. What did these influential people actually say about Nigeria's situation?
What were their claims about this weaponization of poverty?
And how does it all connect to the political landscape? 2027 is clearly on people's minds already, isn't it?
Definitely seems that way. We need to listen closely to how the source reports them, framing the problems and discussing potential ways forward, keeping in mind who was there and what their shared platform implies.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So the setup. June 1st, 2025, Abuja, Amechi's 60th birthday lecture.
Theme: Weaponization of poverty as a means of underdevelopment. A case study of Nigeria. It's a pretty stark theme for a party, right?
It really is. And the source emphasizes this event gave these prominent people a platform to, well, voice some pretty significant concerns and critiques.
And Amaichi himself, the man being celebrated, seems to have used it to make some incredibly blunt statements, especially about the current president.
He didn't hold back at all, did he? The article reports him saying very directly that even though he was a minister in the last APC government, same party as President Tinubu, he did not support him, didn't vote for him in 2023.
Wow. That's quite an admission. Publicly.
It is. And apparently he didn't just say it at the lecture. He reportedly told President Tinubu this face-to-face in Yola, said it was about issues of capacity.
Coming from a former top figure in the ruling party, that definitely gets your attention.
Sets the tone, doesn't it, for the rest of what he reportedly said. And from there, he kind of turns his attention to the opposition, even with his own, let's say, complicated relationship with the current ruling party.
Yeah, what did he say about them?
He basically throws down a challenge. The source quotes him directly. For us, in the opposition, if you want us to remove the man in power, we can remove him from this power.
Okay. That's a bold political statement.
Yeah.
Clearly looking ahead to 2027.
But he doesn't just leave it there. He immediately adds a really crucial condition.
Which is?
Right. He qualifies it. Says the opposition can pull us off if and only if they agree to put the nation's interests first, above their own personal interests or, factional squabbles.
So he sees that internal division, that self-interest, as a major roadblock for the opposition.
That seems to be his point. But he also broadens his critique beyond just the opposition. He levels a pretty strong accusation against Nigerian leaders more generally, maybe even including himself in that as a former leader.
What's the accusation?
He directly accuses them of weaponizing poverty, claims leaders steal money meant for the people and believe they can get away with it because, well, because they think Nigerians are powerless once they're elected.
Right. He apparently used the fuel price hike after the subsidy removal as an example.
Exactly. Said leaders just went ahead knowing people couldn't really do anything beyond maybe protesting for a bit.
And he digs into current policies, too.
Yeah, he acknowledges some, like removing the subsidy might be necessary reforms in theory. But his critique is sharp. He suggests leaders are more interested in the financial gains, the savings, than making sure those benefits actually reach ordinary Nigerians.
And he asked that pointed question. Where did the yen 4 to 5 trillion saved from the subsidy actually go?
Right. Why hasn't that huge sum made a real difference in people's lives? It's a direct challenge to the government's narrative about the policy's success.
Amaechi also, according to the source, connects poverty and insecurity directly.
Very directly. He says starkly, insecurity is 99% poverty. And he brings up his own time as governor in Rivers State.
What did he say about that?
He suggested that when he paid salaries on time, released funds, insecurity seemed to go down, arguing that, economic well-being is key to reducing crime.
But he doesn't just blame leaders, does he? He points fingers at the electorate, too.
He does, identifies Nigerians voting along religious and ethnic lines as a major reason for the country's problems.
That's a familiar argument, blaming identity politics.
It is. And he even goes a bit further, contrasting leaders and followers. He says while the elites have their issues, he thinks the followers are the main problem, presumably for making those choices based on ethnicity or religion.
He paints this picture of Nigeria not as a productive capitalist nation, but just
feasting on the revenue gotten from crude oil. Yeah. A state hooked on oil money, not broad economic activity.
Yeah.
Links that to the challenges.
And he shared that anecdote about a minister of transport.
Oh, right. Said he was ashamed of an appointee who seemed more interested in speaking Hausa or Fulani to the president than actually improving transport. He uses it to highlight his worry about loyalty or ethnicity trumping competence.
And he circles back powerfully to that ethnic and religious division point.
Yeah, saying ordinary people north and south don't inherently have issues with each other. It's division used for elections, he claims.
And he directly challenges the relevance of the Muslim ticket now, saying, "We are all hungry." That statement coming from him is a potent attempt to bridge those divides using shared economic hardship.
So Amaechi's message, as reported, is pretty layered. It's a call for opposition unity, but based on national interest. It's a direct accusation against leaders about poverty and impunity, links poverty to insecurity, and challenges both voters and elites, all framed within the need for political change.
Absolutely. That sets the stage, clearly. Now, another key figure reported speaking was Nasir El-Rufai, former Kaduna governor. How did he see things?
Well, his assessment, according to the source, sounds even more dramatic, actually.
How so?
He's quoted saying Nigeria is in its biggest trouble since 1914, since amalgamation.
Wow. 1914. That's saying the current crisis is basically unprecedented in modern Nigerian history.
It's a stark comparison. And like Amaechi, he hints at political moves happening behind the scenes. Right. He reportedly reveals they're working and conspiring to build a coalition to take Nigeria back on track because it is off track.
Working and conspiring. Interesting choice of words. It definitely adds to this sense of 2027 maneuvering being discussed openly.
And who does he blame for Nigeria being off track?
Leadership failure. Pure and simple. He blames what he calls urban bandits.
Urban bandits?
Yeah, his term for incompetent people who, he claims, have taken over leadership positions.
That's a striking phrase. Paints leadership as almost predatory, doesn't it?
It does. And he echoes Amaechi's point about the electorate, saying the core problem is that Nigerians keep electing the worst people.
So incompetent leaders who know how to grab power, but not what to do with it.
That's his argument, according to the source. They get power, but don't really know what to do with it.
So given that diagnosis, his call to action for 2027 is probably quite clear.
Very clear. He urges citizens to choose wisely. Vote for leaders based on competence, capability, capacity, commitment, skills, vision, dedication. For him, it really hinges on the electorate making better merit-based choices.
Interesting. And his take on the weaponization of poverty, does it align with Amaechi's?
Slightly different, actually. The source says El-Rufai doesn't think politicians deliberately use poverty as a weapon, not in the way Amaechi suggested.
Oh, so what's his view?
He argues that poverty weaponizes itself if allowed to exist like a pest. That's a subtle but important distinction, isn't it?
It is. It shifts the blame maybe from intentional malice to a failure of governance. Like by neglecting poverty, leaders let it become this destructive force that undermines everything and empowers those who exploit the situation.
So leaders should see their jobs as lifting people out of poverty.
Exactly. And therefore, the electorate must choose leaders who can actually do that. For El Rufai, the critical lever seems to be the quality of leadership that voters select.
Okay, moving on. The article also reports on former Vice President Atiku Abubakar speaking. He's a major figure in the main opposition party, the PDP.
Right. And his view on weaponizing poverty seems much closer to Amaechi's initial accusation.
How so?
The source quotes him directly. This particular government is weaponizing poverty. He claims it's being used as a tool for political control.
Okay, so a very direct accusation against the current administration from the top opposition figure there. And like the others, he brings the politics right to the surface.
Absolutely. He confirms they're forming some kind of political alignment. Says he and like-minded political leaders are in an alliance.
An alliance for what?
Specifically, he says, to salvage the country and stop this alleged trend of using poverty for control.
And he specifically names Rotimi Amaechi as a key ally in this.
He does, which really underlines the significance of these different figures meeting and talking collaboration, doesn't it? Cross-party figures discussing an alliance.
Definitely. And Atiku also tries to personalize the impact of poverty.
Yes, by contrasting today's reality with his own past. He talks about growing up in Kano, remembering it as prosperous, a place where people didn't sleep rough.
Contrasting that with now, where he claims poverty and insecurity force people to live under bridges, even in Kano. It's a powerful image to illustrate the scale of the problem he sees.
And he makes a very specific and potentially quite controversial claim as well, according to the source anyway.
What's that?
He alleges that when the Kano state government tried to clear destitute people off the streets and offer support, they were blocked by instructions from higher authorities in Abuja.
Wow. Okay, if that claim, as reported, is accurate, it would be a concrete example supporting his argument that poverty is being intentionally used, or at least not alleviated, from the top down as part of some strategy.
It certainly fits his narrative of weaponization for control. He finishes by reiterating his commitment to this alliance and collective action, says they'll keep working together to tackle poverty and stop government power being used to deepen suffering.
So looking at these three main political voices reported in the source Amaechi, El Rufai, Atiku, there's a clear convergence. Deep concern about poverty, leadership failures, a sense that things are fundamentally wrong.
And open talk about alliances, coalitions, working towards change in 2027. They might have slightly different takes on why poverty is so bad, deliberate weaponization versus incompetence, but the political motivation for speaking out seems undeniable.
Exactly. And the source doesn't just focus on them. It includes perspectives from other prominent figures, too.
Right, adding more dimensions. Cardinal John Aiken, for instance, brings in the ethical angle.
What did he emphasize?
That politics should be service. Service to God, service to citizens. Not about accumulating wealth. He directly links tackling poverty to the health of the electoral system.
How so?
He argues poverty only gets addressed when people can make free and fair choices about their leaders. So for him, democracy's strength, its very survival, depends on addressing poverty.
That connects the poverty fight right back to the fundamentals of democracy electing good, ethical leaders.
Yeah.
Then you have Emir Sanusi Lamido II. His perspective is shaped by that unique journey he's had, from CBN governor to traditional ruler.
And he points out that many elites, maybe, don't really grasp poverty till they see it up close.
Precisely. He contrasts seeing statistics with actually experiencing the conditions, the lack of basic services, the state of schools during his time as emir.
And his questions sound quite piercing.
They do. Do we actually love the people, or do we just love ruling over them? What are our priorities? He points to the disconnect between, say, big, flashy projects in cities and the lack of basic healthcare in rural areas. He calls for an urgent focus on real solutions.
Then there was Professor Usman Yusuf.
Also quoted, blames corruption and bad governance for what he calls multidimensional poverty. And he notes a disturbing trend. Hospitals are increasingly dealing with social problems caused by poverty, not just medical ones.
And finally, Dr. Chidi Amuda, who gave the main lecture.
He ties the whole future of democracy, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa, to fighting poverty. Argues democracy has to prove its relevance by what it means for the poor majority, rescuing them from the republic of poverty, as he put it.
So yeah, a really powerful consensus seems to emerge from this event, at least as the source reports it. Politicians, Religious leaders, traditional rulers, academics, all pointing to pervasive poverty as a critical national crisis.
And linking it inextricably to leadership, governance, and the political system itself.
If we connect the dots from all these voices in the article, what we see is this gathering of prominent Nigerians, and they're lamenting these deep national challenges, primarily poverty, leadership failures.
And the political context is just unavoidable, isn't it? The talk about removing the government in 2027, forming coalitions, alliances, the urgent calls for changing how leaders are picked.
It all frames these concerns about poverty squarely within the run-up to the next election cycle. At least that's how the speakers themselves seem to be framing it.
Yeah, it positions 2027, from their perspective, as reported, as this potentially pivotal moment, a chance to address these chronic issues they're highlighting.
And the calls for opposition unity, for the electorate to choose wisely, they're presented as essential steps toward tackling these deep problems.
And it's important they don't present these issues, hunger, insecurity, poor leadership, as just abstract ideas. Speakers like Amaichi and Atiku ground them in everyday reality.
Using phrases like, "we're all hungry," or talking about people living under bridges, it's framed to hit home for you, the listener.
Yeah, and it's really important we make this clear again. As we go through this source, we're presenting the viewpoints, the claims, the observations made by these specific people at this event as Restore Nigeria News reported them. Our aim is just to give you a clear, impartial look at this significant conversation that happened based on the source material we have.
All right, so this deep dive into the Restore Nigeria News piece, it shows a moment where key players from across Nigeria's landscape came together.
And they use this birthday lecture platform to voice really deep concerns about the country's direction, framing poverty as this central crisis fueled by leadership problems.
And openly discussing political action alliances looking towards the next election.
Yeah. So what does this all mean?
Well, this deep dive into the article reveals this powerful convergence of voices. Nigeria's political, societal elite, all gathered at this significant event focused on the weaponization of poverty.
And they paint a pretty bleak picture, don't they? A nation facing profound challenges. Poverty, leadership gaps, the political dynamics heading into 2027.
It's a stark assessment, especially coming from people within the system, past and present. Figures like Amechi, El-Rufai, Atiku, they're not just critiquing.
No, they're openly talking alliances, pathways for change, stressing unity, putting the nation first, at least. That's what they reportedly said.
And you have these other influential voices, religious, traditional, academic, echoing the same deep concern over poverty, calling for integrity, service, fair elections, focusing on the poor majority.
The underlying message coming through the source seems clear. There's real momentum among these figures, highlighting poverty as the central crisis and framing the next election as this critical window for change.
A change they present as depending on two things: elite unity and the electorate's choices.
Right. And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. The source shows how these speakers, even with slightly different ideas about why poverty is so bad, deliberate weaponization, incompetence, bad voter choices, they keep coming back to the political arena for answers.
Elite unity, alliances, getting voters to choose differently.
Exactly. Which raises a big question, doesn't it, given the sheer scale of the poverty they're describing and all the complex reasons they offer for it.
What specific concrete actions, beyond just forming political alliances or telling people to vote wisely in 2027, could genuinely lift millions out of this state, regardless of who ends up in power?
That's something to think about, isn't it? Based on the powerful voices and perspectives we've explored today in this deep dive.
That's our deep dive for now.